All right. Good morning, Kirk. Afternoon, Kirk, I mean.
Yeah, good morning, Sheldon. How are you doing today?
Warm. It's
Mm.
uh it's nice and hot here. Had some sweet thunder showers roll through yesterday.
Oh, I'd love some of those here.
Yeah,
We are pretty dry.
risk a tornado wasn't great, but
No.
yeah, they rolled all the way through the prairies, and some of those clouds
Yeah.
were sweet. Nothing like a
We
good thunder
we
shower.
we almost had a rain shower here last night. It passed to the south of us, and I was just looking green with envy at that southern skies. It was dark and the rain was pouring, but not much here. However, I do
It
have a
often
double
goes
espresso.
around us too. Like it'll split right when it hits our city. But
You must not be living right, Sheldon.
I know. The whole population of Steinbach is just evil.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
So
parting of the Red Sea.
you have a good coffee there.
Yeah, no, I have a coffee machine, so I just made myself a double espresso with a lot of crema on top. And I only do it twice a day.
Yep.
For all of those that you here might be concerned about me becoming a caffeine addict, once at breakfast and once at lunch.
How do they count caffeine? Is it joules?
Oh, you know, I've never even concerned myself with that question.
Okay.
It's not pretty sure it's not joules because that's an energy, a unit of
Okay.
energy.
Maybe
Although
I'm
some
thinking
people,
Jules because we have this. My wife, whose name is Julie,
yeah,
we call her Jules, but she made this from my mom or my mother-in-law. These squares that
oh
they
yeah,
have like caramel and chocolate and all sorts of stuff in them. A bajillion jewels each is my guess, but worth every single one. That's all I can say about that.
Well, sometimes, it's just nice to have something like that to spice your day up.
Yeah. Now the only problem is she cut them really small. So, and when something's cut really small, it means you can have as many of them as you want.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it.
And one entire small one into the hatch, as opposed to taking a large piece and taking small nibbles.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you're popping them into your hatch like that, well, you know what it's like with popcorn, eh? You just don't stop. You just keep on going. And you can eat the equivalent of maybe, 5 or 6 cake pans full of this stuff without even realizing it.
It's all her fault.
Yep.
All her fault. Yeah. Okay. Well, today we're going to step on some minefields. We are going to delve into the subject of words, sexuality, gender identity, all of those things. There was a little bit of a blow up this week when it came to Twitter and different things like that, because Merriam-Webster has added a new definition to the word male and a new definition to the word female. Now, it's interesting because there was I believe it was a U.S. Committee meeting where somebody was asked the question, "What is a woman?" And the person responded back, "I'm not a biologist." Okay, so you need to be a biologist to answer this question. Now, Kirk, you have a little bit of that bio word in your background, so maybe you
Yeah.
can help me answer this question. But you can't look to the dictionary anymore because they've officially contradicted themselves within the pages of the dictionary, or in today's world, the online pages of a dictionary. So let me just pull open this just so everybody knows what we're talking about. And I'm going to do the female one because that was the one that probably blew up the most. Just share this. All right. Are you able to see that?
Yeah. Well, I actually had the actual definition pulled up here. Boy, I see that. Yep.
But I'm not seeing it
Well,
on the
wait a sec.
screen.
No, I don't. There's a thing that says add to stream.
That would
I
be it.
click, I click
Perfect.
that.
You did it. You figured it out. Okay. And I'll blow this up a little bit so people can actually read it. So the first definition, 1A, is of relating to or being the sex that typically has the capacity to bear young or produce eggs. The second of that A is having or producing only pistils or pistillate flowers. Is that how I pronounce that?
Yeah, just fake it, Sheldon, and 90% of the audience won't know the difference.
Perfect. And then the other 10 can make snarky comments in the underneath. And for those of you watching, please comment, especially if you're really passionate about the subject, because we want to engage with people that are going through some of this stuff, because it is pretty big these days. And grace, love, remember that needs to drive all our conversation here. So then the second part here is B, having a gender identity that is the opposite of male. C, made up of usually adult members of the female sex, characteristic of girls, women, or the female sex, designed for or typically used by girls or women, engaged in or exercised by girls or women, and having a quality such as small size or delicacy of sound, sometimes associated with the female sex. I'll leave it there. Now, they did this, what happened this week is they added this line. Now, they also added it to male, so having a gender identity that is the opposite of female. But what they've done is they've basically said, if you have a gender identity that is the opposite of male, all of this other stuff is opposite day. You can have a gender identity that is the opposite of male, which makes you a female, but you are not being the sex that typically has the capacity of bear young or produce eggs. And so the word doesn't mean anything anymore, because it really comes down to, in the gender identity world, a person's internal sense of being male, female, some combination of male or female, or neither male or female nor female. So if the internal sense is what defines somebody's as being female, because that is the opposite of male, you have to look and see what is a male. But if they are all of these other things, then you are literally having to figure out what's in their head to determine if they're male or female. Which, understand, we're living in a really weird world where words don't mean anything anymore. But how do you get here?
Yeah, this touches on science, it touches on philosophy, and it also touches on psychology. But I think looking at the definition here, when you start discussing definitions, it impinges primarily starts with philosophy, and that is, how do you define something? You don't just make up stuff as a definition to explain something. There usually is a requirement that the definition refer to something that's external to the immediate things within the word itself being defined. And that provides kind of like an objective anchor for the definition. So, I mean, even in grade school, we were taught never to use the word or variations of that word when coming up with a definition for a word. This is a little bit different, however. It's quite interesting. I've never seen this before. And keep in mind, I'm saying this to the audience here, is we are just live, in real time, working through this and trying to understand the implications and what's behind it and where it's going. So we're not presenting ourselves as having this all figured out, but there's some things that immediately stand out. And one of them is that I've never seen a definition before where the definition of one thing is defined as the opposite of the definition of something else. And when you go to the definition of that other thing is defined as the opposite of the first thing. And so what you have here is a circularity that tells you absolutely nothing. You could say X is the opposite of Y, And so you want to figure out, oh, then to know what X is, I better figure out what Y is. But when you go to Y, to the definition of that, it says it's the opposite of X. You'll say, oh, well, then I got to go back to the definition of X, but that's referring to Y, and Y refers to X. You have a sort of a circularity and a tautology that actually tells you absolutely nothing about how you're trying to define this word, because it's no longer, it refers to itself. In other words, the definition doesn't necessarily have, for female, doesn't have female in the definition directly, but indirectly it does, because female is when you look at the opposite of male, and male is defined according to what a female is, you now have a self-referencing definition that tells you absolutely nothing about what a male or a female is. But that's not surprising, because I have seen a great reluctance now to actually define this word in any specific way. Because the moment that you do that, and that's what they've actually done in the first part, when they're talking about part 1A, we're talking biology here. So the biological world does provide an objective external standard against which you can anchor your definition. It's not just a matter of what's going on in your head or personal feelings. It provides an external standard. You can look at that and say, yes, this is a male, that's a female. But in definition B, in 1B, that is gone. In fact, you don't even have a standard anymore. Some might argue, well, it's in your mind, but what you're saying here when you use the word identity, but really it's not just in your mind. It's the thing in your mind is your concept of what it means to be a male. But that is defined as the opposite of what it means to be a female. And you have lost any kind of hope of anchoring that word in objective reality. It's actually not a definition.
Now, I want to go into this because this is right from the Government of Canada website. What is gender? What is sex? Because this is one of the ways that we've been able to try and figure out when it comes to gender identity, what's the difference between the biological sex versus gender and things in terms of what the culture is saying right now. So sex refers to a set of biological attributes in humans and animals. It is primarily associated with physical and physiological features, including chromosomes, gene expression, hormone levels and function, and reproductive sexual anatomy. Sex is usually categorized as female or male. But there's variation in the biological attributes that comprise sex and how those attributes are expressed. Gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender diverse people. It influences how people perceive themselves and each other, how they act and interact, and the distribution of power and resources in society. Gender identity is not confined to a binary, girl, woman, boy, man, nor is it static. It exists along a continuum and can change over time. There's considerable diversity in how individuals and groups understand, experience, and express gender through the roles they take on, the expectations placed on them, relations with others, and the complex ways that gender is institutionalized in society. So we have some definitions, government-approved definitions here, but is that not breaking when it comes to these definitions? Like it seems like the dictionary is contradicting even this.
Well, it used to be that the word gender had an objective anchor, and that was biological sex. And this government website that you've shown here has changed the meaning of the word gender. It has removed that. It's no longer, but basically in let's say 50 years ago, if you said gender was the same, it was essentially the same as sex. What is your gender or what is your sex? That would be the same answer in both cases, because the meaning of the word gender, if you wanted to use that, was just another word for saying what is your sex, a male or female. And that was anchored in biology, which is an objective reality. It exists out there, and it doesn't matter how we feel about what that is. It's just, that's the facts. But in this definition here, it's disattached itself. It's become detached from external reality, and it's starting to define itself a very different way. Very different way.
Now, this isn't new. This is 2020. And there's a whole conversation that's been going on for 10 years about this. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to figure out how this, like, if there, see, this is as we're talking in real time, I'm just confused because I don't know if male/female is sex or gender. It looks like it's now a mix.
Yeah, well, they use the word gender in 1B, having a gender identity that is opposite of female. And so they brought female into this and then indirectly male, as we've already seen. And so now gender is being attached to, or at least male and female is part of the understanding of the word gender. And is sort of saying it's not well, actually, it says nothing, as we already saw, if you're just going to use that definition. But the government needs to have a way of identifying people. And so they have to, but yet at the same time, it wants to be politically correct. It wants to be affirming those people who might be biological males and feel that they're women, in other words, feel that they're female. So it doesn't want to offend those people. It wants to account for them. So now they've split between sex and gender. And there is going to be contradiction. There are going to be contradictions here. Like you pointed out in 1A, you're using a biological definition. In 1B, you're using something that's in the mind, but the mind is that thing in the mind is relative to gender stereotypes. And it's not whatever the other is, which is maleness, and that's not femaleness. So we get bogged down there. We move from A to B. We just get bogged down. And another philosophical point that I think needs to be raised here is that in philosophy, there's a branch of philosophy that discusses truth. It's called epistemology. How do you know what is true? And you can say there is the correspondence theory of truth, which is what most people use in everyday life. For example, when they're crossing a street. And the correspondence theory of truth is a belief or feeling is true if and only if it corresponds to reality. So in this case...
define reality.
Well, normally, that actually is a very good question, Sheldon. And you can literally have hours of discussion in philosophy on, because you see, even that definition presupposes an understanding of what reality is. And in our culture today, reality has actually been modified itself. And because reality is being modified, you get definitions like what we're discussing today. But reality originally meant it's something, it's facts about the way things actually are. In fact, when my professor first presented this on the blackboard or whatever he was, or his speech, he said, a belief is true if and only if it corresponds to the way things actually are. So the way things actually are in reality is the way things actually are. And, but there's a lot of problems. How do you perceive the way things actually are? And that gets you bogged down eventually. But generally, reality is thought to be something objective, something that is not a matter of personal opinion or feeling. Okay. So if you define reality that way, then the definition of let's say, gender identity and maleness and femaleness according to gender identity, that's heavily contingent on what you feel. So it's not objective anymore. It becomes subjective, and that's actually not reality in the generally understood way. Now, in our culture, though, it has shifted. In a post-truth culture, reality is is the way you feel about things. That is just as much part of reality as the earth going around the sun. In fact, if in what we're finding now in our culture is if objective reality out there, let's say science, contradicts how you feel, then how you feel trumps what science has to say about things. So, in other words, when you're talking about objective reality in our culture today, there's a percentage of our culture, not everybody, that feels that objective reality or their feelings are more a part of are more objective than things outside that may contradict your feelings. I don't know if that makes sense. Now,
Yeah. So like if I feel I am, if I feel I'm wet, yet there's no moisture on me, I may have something in my brain telling me there is moisture, but you can't see it or feel it on me because it's not actually there. But my brain might be saying it is.
yeah. So now, how do you deal with that? So I've spent quite a bit of time in various care homes with seniors in the dementia wing of those care homes. And there's different ways to deal with it. Normally, let's say if a person has dementia, you don't argue with the person. It's not, there's nothing you can do to convince them they're not wet. So you just kind of go along with that and work with the person so that they can, you don't cause a scene or you don't get them upset and so forth. Now, this is a little bit different because we're not talking in generally when we're talking about this definition of maleness or femaleness, we're not talking necessarily about people with dementia. We're talking about people like you and I walking up and down the streets who enjoy a double espresso just like I do and so forth, and it can engage in a cogent conversation. And in those cases, this is where gets interesting because objective reality, when there's not a lot at personal stake here, does seem to carry the day. For example, you can have a person who believes that their feelings trump reality, but they will still look both ways before crossing the street, especially if there's a speeding transit bus coming towards them. So they still believe there's an external reality out there, and regardless of what they might feel, that they can cross the street anyways, they will still take that look because they know there's consequences. In that way, you could convince them maybe that they're not actually wet because it's not a deep, emotionally held feeling that they have. It's not a state of being that they feel. Whereas when you're talking about gender identity, you're talking about something deeper than that, something more, let's say, personal and close to the heart to that person than merely feeling that they're wet. And when that occurs, then their perception of objective reality really shifts to their feelings trumping what is real out there. Now, to be fair, some would argue that this is part of their feelings are part of objective reality. For example, I was looking at a paper this morning where they suggest there might be differences in with transgender people in the way their brain is in close to birth and just immediately after birth. There's certain final processes that occur that determine whether your brain will be it has to do with estrogen receptors, let's put it that way. And no, it's only a small study. It only says maybe there's a genetic difference here, at least when it comes to when genes are activated and deactivated and so forth, that might produce a genuine female feeling that you are female when in fact you have a totally 100% functioning male body and vice versa.
Now,
So
can I interrupt here, Kirk? If
yeah,
you're
go ahead.
watching this, and I know if you're watching this later, we're not going to be around to answer it right now, but please, if you are going through this and you're trans male or trans female and you would like to share with us what it's like in your head as you're going through this, please tell us, because like as somebody who is biologically male and my brain tells me I'm male. I have no idea what it's like. So, and I think Kirk, you could say the same thing. We don't know what it's like to be trans.
Yeah, we're just working through this basically a definition of words here.
Yeah. So, like, is it growing up? You wanted to play with different toys than the boys in the class would, or like what is it that might make you feel that you're female instead of male, or male instead of female?
Part of the problem in defining these things is avoiding gender stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
So if I defined a male as someone, let's say you're in university class and they're going to define males as people who like engineering, or they would say we have more males in engineering because the male has more of an interest in engineering than the female, and we got more females in nursing because females have more interest. If you were to say that, you get into big trouble because you're committing what's known as a gender stereotype. And so the universities are falling all over themselves trying to even up the numbers in at least engineering. I don't see much of that occurring in nursing, but in engineering, they're trying to really raise the number of people up. But that illustrates the problem of defining the term male and female. And if someone would say, well, I feel like a female because I like the faculty of nursing and I like to play with dolls and I like knitting, and they list a bunch of things, that's extremely problematic. That's why I think the definition in Merriam-Webster avoids everything like that. Although I notice in one place there, they have one definition, not the same one, but when you when you look at the male definition, have you got the male one?
Yeah, this is a male here.
Oh yeah. Where is it? There's one to do with, maybe it's in the noun section. Courage, exhibiting characteristics of, no, it's not there.
Oh, it might be under man.
Ah, that's it. Man. Okay, so that's
male links to man, a male person, a man or a boy. And then the man definition is when.
Yeah, look at there. Possessing distinctions of manhood, courage, strength, and vigor. Okay, so that's a problem because.
But that's not obsolete. This one is.
Yeah, that's obsolete. But you see, there's a problem of gender stereotyping as well, because I've known men who definitely would not possess those attributes, and I've known women who do possess those attributes of courage and so forth. And that illustrates the problem of gender stereotyping according to, just psychological behavior. And I say by psychological, I mean courage, vigor, although strength could be taken either way. If they're talking about physical strength, yeah, of course.
This is very interesting here. Obsolete, the quality or state of being manly, manliness. Woman, not obsolete.
Womanliness, yeah. Yeah, I think there's something underlying the surface here, Sheldon.
Yeah.
What's underlying the surface is that Merriam-Webster is trying to walk through a minefield here. And as a result, and detach the meaning from objective reality. And as a result, what happens is this kind of confusion on what, I just don't buy gender stereotypes personally, and don't let anybody know this, Sheldon.
Okay.
But when I was in grade 3,
just between you and I,
just between you and me, I discovered knitting. And I really enjoyed it. Now, knitting is thought to be an attribute of femaleness or womanliness or whatever. I like knitting. I don't do it anymore, but I did a lot of it in grade 3, and I could see myself getting back into it. It's just that I have so many hobbies and interests. Knitting is not, I could see maybe in the wintertime, but I just love a lot of things. Nevertheless, I would not in the least feel that makes me a female in any sense. And that's because gender stereotypes tend to be something that are kind of generalizing about people, and a man or a woman, and there's a whole spectrum of interests and enjoyments there. And this is part of the minefield that Merriam-Webster gets into. So they just completely, in 1B, the definition of 1B, they just say, It's one whose gender identity is the opposite of being being a female. And when you go over to the female, it's one whose gender identity is the opposite of being a male. And you're left hanging saying, well, then what do you mean by male or female? Then you have to go to a different definition of what it means. And you're finding that they're using words there that contradict 1B. Say 1A definition contradicts 1B, biologically speaking. And so they're trying to, normally you would say if you have this, well, let me just pause there.
Yeah. Like for me, if I'm writing this and I really wanted to integrate somebody's gender identity as being a part of this definition, wouldn't it be more helpful to say having a gender identity that is feeling male?
That could be. I mean, that would,
because that's really what they're trying to do here.
Yeah.
So if you said having the internal sense of being male.
Yeah, you could say, I feel like I would be my perception of a male. And it's my perception of one, because the perception of what a male is would vary if you're not talking biology here. So you could certainly say, with all honesty, say, I feel like and this is interesting about the definition. They're actually defining a male according to the gender identity here. But in reality, perhaps they should say you're male, but you feel or you identify as a female. We can identify with a lot of things, or as some things. There's just reading another article in a science journal this morning on gender dysphoria, which is related here. So at the end of the day, I think we have to acknowledge that people feel, the feelings of people are very real. Let's put it that way. They are very real. They don't always necessarily match objective reality. And normally when they don't match objective...
Now, maybe define objective reality versus what I would say is their reality.
Mm-hmm. So objective reality is the reality of the world that's out there, external to the person's own idea, own mind, own feelings, own what's going on within them, their own inner state of being. So objective reality is what's out there. Subjective, you would say the subjective reality is that the person who has the body of a fully functioning body of a man feels that they are a woman, but by woman, you're not saying they have the fully functioning body of a woman. You suddenly shift in that definition a little bit and say they feel like a woman might feel inside. So they feel inside the way a woman might feel inside in her mind, even though they would have to admit they don't have the body that a woman has. And there's a disconnect there. So subjective reality is what's going on in your head. Objective reality is what's going external to your imagination or your wishes or your feelings and desires. That's external reality or objective. And we call it objective because it's not contingent on your feelings.
Okay. So if, now when we're saying the term feeling, it's what your brain is telling you, not necessarily what other people are seeing. But just because it's a feeling, it doesn't mean it's not real to the person.
Feeling's real. We can grant that the feeling is real.
And so I think, especially as somebody who is trying to work this out, I'm more on the conservative side. So as somebody who's trying to work this out and not understanding how people are feeling this way, I don't understand. How do I treat people that are feeling this way? And I don't think as Christians, or even just as nice people, we want to be pushing people away. You're stupid. This isn't reality, anything like that. But it's really helpful to know what is that feeling for somebody like? I have a number of members of my family that struggle with anxiety. It's real for them. The pain they go through is real. And if you just say it's all in your head, that doesn't help at all. So as I'm looking at these definitions, it would be really helpful to be able to work through those where the definitions themselves are objective, something that we could actually work with. So, okay, trans male, trans, but having definitions where we're able to say, okay, this is where this person is at. But by changing the definitions of words to mean absolutely nothing, it breaks language. Because if I come across somebody laying in the ditch and I call the police and say, I've got a body in the ditch here, and they come and they go, okay, we have a body looking biologically female. But if they don't know what the person had as a feeling before they passed away, and they come out and say, this person is female, but everything in their identification is male, they've changed their name, etc. Now we have a broken ability to communicate.
Yeah, but to play the devil's advocate, I would suggest that the person who identified, let's say a person with a biologically male body who identifies as a woman, is not really worried about that. They're more worried about being accepted, being recognized, but maybe even more importantly, they're more worried about their own state of being. How do they deal with themselves? The disconnect between their biological self and what's going on in their brain. And but you're absolutely right. I mean, I guess we wouldn't have this issue if we just stuck with a new term for men who identify as women and women who identify as men. If we had a different term for that, then the word as for man and woman, as it's been understood for thousands of years by all branches of humanity, pretty much, would be not a problem. That's not a problem. We're coming up with a new description or a noun that describes people who feel the opposite gender than they are biologically. But and I should say that I have an interest in ancient writings. I do a lot of reading in those. I have lexicons of ancient languages, and so when I talk about male and female, it's not a modern concept. It's something that's been around for literally thousands of years. It's one of those basic things to humanity. And what happens when we start redefining male and female according to what's in your mind is we enter a different reality. We have to enter a different reality where your subjective feelings are now trumping to a certain extent, or could trump objective reality. But more than that, we're entering a phase now when you start seeing definitions on government websites where the feelings inside your mind, other people are being asked to bring their own feelings into line with yours. So if you feel that you are a woman, even though you have a biologically male body, the expectation now amongst many in our culture is that other people must be required to agree with what's going on in your mind. Affirm what's going on in your mind. And if they, at least in Canada here, if they try and counsel you to maybe resolve this disconnect in your person between your body and your mind by maybe psychological counseling or whatever, that's a criminal offense here in Canada. Mm-hmm. So it's not just what's going on in our minds anymore. It's that what's going on in a person's mind must be, and they're required to, or they're expected to at the very least, agree with that. So the other person's concept of reality, let's say they're more anchored in objective reality here, and they see this person walking down the street and they say, oh, that's clearly a man. Or not walking down the street, you're in the shower room and you look around and, oh, that's clearly a man over there. You are not allowed, you are expected to not to reserve judgment. You're on because of what might be going on in that person's mind. And the question is, where does this stop? How much is this going to affect the way our culture lives, the way we operate, when we now have to ignore what's objective out there in reality and redefine terms according to what's subject, what's going inside of people's minds? And now the interesting thing is that you might have two people, and in one person's mind, that person identifies as a woman. But in that other person's mind, they look at the first person, they say, no, that's not a woman, that's a man. So you have two people, both have two different mental states. But in our culture today, you are expected to agree with the one who is more closely anchored to the subjective, what's going on in their own mind, than you are to the person who objectively looks at the other person and says, well, that's a man. And that's interesting as well. Because
how does that work in, okay, finish, because I got a question about materialism in there.
Oh, go ahead, Sheldon. This was a kind of a nuanced, delicate thing, and
You're okay with me?
I just raised that.
Yeah, so like in a materialistic world where everything is based off of the particles and stuff from the beginning of the universe and laws of physics, how does that work?
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's an excellent question, because you would have expected in a world that's increasingly, the science says would be increasingly disposed to go with objective reality and what defines a male and female. You would come up with a scientific definition. And in the case of humanity, it's pretty easy. It's genetically determined. There's a sex determinant factor in the X and Y chromosomes that really determine whether you're going to be a woman or whether your body's going to be woman or male or female.
I'm just even thinking the logistics behind the law in Canada is basically if somebody feels like they're a woman, they're a woman. But based on physics and nature and particles, etc., I can't actually change anything in my head.
No, and in fact, the paper I read this morning says you can't. I mean, they're saying you can't, but you can change your body.
Right.
I mean, you can change your.
But how am I supposed to legally follow this law? Because there's nothing in science to say that this makes any sense.
Well, some scientists are trying to show that, and that was the gist of one of the papers this morning. But I had questions with that. I mean, there's another paper I have right here that shows there as, let's see, it was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. It's called Sex Differences in the Structural Connectome of the Human Brain. And basically, they're looking at the difference between a male and a female brain in how they're connected when you're thinking. So the female, the brain, the right and left hemispheres are heavily integrated when you're thinking about something or you're operating, but the male is heavily either left brain or right brain, majority of it. And they actually have diagrams where they got the outcome of 1,000 people. And this is a peer-reviewed paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. There is a very large difference between a male and a female brain. But what I note here is in this more recent paper, these scientists don't seem to take that into account. In other words, there could be very powerful female and male brains that, according to how the person thinks, laterally or let's say between the hemispheres or within the hemispheres. But in another sense, it looks like to me they're clutching at straws here to find some objective difference. I would have to infer from their paper is that the patients they're working with have the females, regardless of what they identify as, when they're thinking, think according to the female interhemisphere procedure, and the males follow the male procedure, regardless of how they identify. So they're now looking for something more nuanced, maybe something different. But then it becomes cherry picking. If you're trying to justify this scientifically, cherry picking and saying, oh, this might be the difference. And there are long ways from being able to do that. Now, the other interesting thing, though, when you get back to your initial question, is in a material world, how did we get here? And that is, it reminds me of the research by J.D. Unwin, who found that when a society has their own sexual revolution, so to speak, rational thinking actually dissipates completely within that civilization within 3 generations. So rational thinking is where you have premises and logical conclusions. It would be heavily science oriented. And what we're witnessing now is an exodus away from science with the transgender debate, where the cold hard science says, no, this is a male and this is a female, this is a man or this is a woman. That's what the cold hard science says. But the feelings then trump up, because what in J.D. Unwin's research showed is that rational thinking is dispensed with, and what you want to believe emerges as the trump card that governs how that society works. But when they do that, the society reaches a point where it can no longer function and it collapses, because what you want to believe begins to spread into other areas, into laws, for example, into the work ethic, things that are really important for the flourishing of a society. And that's what we're seeing here.
And so Pepe has said here, I will point you to ignore the insanity. In my opinion, we need to stop debating and get to busy building our own schools, social media companies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I'll ignore the word insanity in this, because I think that's a loaded term, but the idea of having multiple cultures going on, or multiple societies, where one society says this and one society says that, that's more of a country thing. Or in the States, you might get different states that lean more one way than the other when it comes to some of these things. But we've been doing that, have we not? Like, there's always been Christian schools or Catholic schools, or my kids attended a traditional school. Social media companies. Well, yeah, you can build your own social media companies. There's lots of them out there. But if the majority of people are in 1 or 2 or 3 of them, you're not engaging with them. If you want to not engage with other people on this planet, I don't think you're accomplishing God's mission.
Well, that's an interesting question. There is the problem of the echo chamber, as you raised there, Sheldon, is if we have our own social media, then we have our own echo chamber. We're not interacting anymore. But there's also the problem of, let's say, the educational system and our children. So I happen to know in my particular province that the teachers union here, the elementary teachers union, has a firm commitment, not just a firm commitment list, to indoctrinate and socially engineer the children in the public school system to embrace this new trend of, let's say, subjective reality and so forth, exactly in the trans debate. And so there reaches a point where you say, okay, my children are not yet ready to engage the world. If I just toss them into the public school system, they will be trained by the other side, or the subjective side, the post-truth category of our culture, so that they won't even be able to engage that culture. They will have been indoctrinated into it. So in that sense, I could not, in good conscience, and my kids are all growing up, but if I had young kids, I could not in good conscience anymore put them in the public school system in my particular province, not in the younger ages. In the high school area, I think I would hopefully have them trained well enough so they can think for themselves, think rationally, and engage and begin to be salt and light, as it were, in our culture. And at some point, we have to transition from the training in how to survive and flourish in a secular culture to actually going out there and being able to interact with secular culture. So that's one part of the thing. As another part is as Christians, as people who are following Christ, like I have a very clear, I think God has made it very clear what the true definition or the objective reality is with regarding men and women, male and femaleness. But in this world, we all suffer from something or another. None of us have a perfect grasp of reality. We all do things that are morally wrong, as just different for different people. And we all have even genetic issues. We all have mutations in our chromosomes and so forth. And we're just trying to get through the best way we can. But for the follower of Christ, a moral obligation to somehow engage everybody else in the world. And it doesn't matter how much we would see they are off of objective reality here, no matter how far their mind has disengaged from, let's say, the objective reality over there. And we have a moral obligation to engage them, to represent God to them, to actually care for them and love them as, say, Christ loved the Samaritan, which was quite hated in Jewish society in that day. So in that sense, we can't just, move away, isolate ourselves, call people insane. In fact, one of the things we probably have to do is build bridges. So if there's something that actually burns the bridge, then we probably should avoid that if we're going to use certain terms. On the other hand, though, there are two groups of people in this world. Jesus referred to the one group as the kingdom of God, those people who have eternal life, spiritual rebirth. They have an eternal destiny. And then there's the other group who have not that. They still have not eternal life. They don't have a eternal destiny with God. And somehow we have to be able to influence that section of the world somehow. But even if what they do is flagrantly wrong, no matter what it might be, we have to be able to engage them. But at the same time, in the first group, the Kingdom of God group, let's say people who actually practice, they want to follow Christ, that is where we begin to talk about whether things are right or wrong. Because they have to have a very clear idea on what God says, what the creator of the universe says with regard to these matters. But I seldom talk about these things with the people who are not spiritually reborn, because that's not the issue with them. The issue is whether or not they want this relationship with God. So I have two very different ways of dialoguing with people. It's kind of like doctors and patients. The doctors need to understand very clearly all the possible physical issues that could happen. But their job for the patients is to bring that person to a point where they're physically healthy. They don't need to know everything the doctor knows. But if the doctors don't know any more than the patients do, we got a problem. And this is where it's very important today for the Christian to have their head on straight, to be thinking clearly when it comes to this issue, even in terms of this definition here.
And that's why we're having this conversation. It's not just because it's a fun topic, although I find it an incredibly interesting topic to deal with. Mm-hmm. But we want to have these conversations because we want to figure out in our heads and figure out with you watching, how do we engage in this conversation without being a jerk, without burning all the bridges that are out there. Like when I look at how Jesus treated the Pharisees, he treated them a lot differently than the adulterous woman, the Samaritan. Like he was not impressed with the religious people of the day. He loved the people that, as he claimed, needed help. And so as Christians, are we more interested in being right or being heard? And in this case, we need to be heard before people will even engage on whether we're right or wrong.
Oh, yes. So I would say at the end of the day, there is a solution. And that is this. What God seems to communicate to us is that there's a natural way we are. He calls it the natural person. And we can't change the way we naturally are. So whatever you may feel, whatever orientations you may have, the wrong approach is just try and change the way you naturally are, because the natural person is what you are, and you can't change that. And God says that's in a state of being corrupted. But when you become spiritually reborn, he creates a new nature within you. And the new nature has nothing to do with whether you're male or female or slave or free person or whatever. It has everything to do with your relationship with God and the kind of person you'll be in eternity. And there's certain hints. There will be no such thing as male or female, maybe. He says we'll be like the angels, whatever that is. There'll be no marriage, that kind of thing. But bottom line is you may not be able to change the way you naturally are. And so that would be a wrong road to try and travel. Rather, if you become spiritually reborn through faith in Christ, a new nature is created within you, which you can then choose. You have a choice now. Do I live according to how I naturally feel, or do I live according to this new supernatural nature? And I have experienced this, and I continue to do that, and I would not trade that for anything. And so there is that solution, that hope for a person who is wondering what to do about this.
And if you want to know more about that, Kirk has a video called Beautiful Mind. I believe it's one of the top ones on the channel. Watch that video. It goes way more into that subject.
Yeah, Quest for a Beautiful Mind. It's on my YouTube channel.
So Pepe, thank you for the comments. Those of you who are watching now, feel free, comment. Make sure you like and subscribe, and hit that bell to be notified when we talk again, which I don't know when we're going to talk again, because I think we have some holidays and different things coming up over the next few weeks. But incredibly interesting topic. If you want to talk to us more, head over to kirkdurston.com, send in a message there if you want to talk privately, or comment and hit and go into the live chat here on these videos. And don't forget, take a look at the other stuff that Kirk has produced. Have you written anything lately?
I've got one piece that's actually, I've drafted it. It's out for review. They have given me their comments, and later on this week, I'll make those changes or incorporate that. And Sweet. Then we will, it will be up at the latest by next Monday or Tuesday.
So if you're interested in getting notified when that goes up, head over to kirkdurston.com and sign up for his newsletter. Yeah. Awesome. Good chatting with you, Kirk.
Yeah,
Thank you all for watching.
Thanks, Pepe, too, for your comments there.
I'll just throw this one up just as we're leaving here. I think people focus too much on national issues that honestly can't be changed unless you just start by loving your neighbor. Yes, podcasting seems to be the only social media that may be net positive. I also agree with that. I had this come into my head earlier this week. Loving your neighbor doesn't come with a filter.
No, there's no people filtered out of that.
And so, especially when it comes to topics where you don't quite understand or might seem different or those kind of things, remember, loving your neighbor means treating them as yourself, as you would like to be treated. And so, even when we're dealing with these hard issues, I think it's important to head that direction. So, talk to you in a little while. We'll see when that ends up being. Bye. Maybe we'll do an in-person one at staff conference or something.
Yeah, we could. We could.
All right. Talk to you later.
Okay. Bye for now.